We're back, joined by the Speaker of the House, not at the moment, alas, but in memory, one of the most important figures of our time, and continuing to contribute mightily to our public policy debate on so many different fronts, notably with such important books as Trump and the American Future and Trump versus China. I want to turn to Trump versus China, America versus China, with you, Mr. Speaker. You've talked about the Swalwell affair. My expectation is that Nancy Pelosi's determination to keep him in place, not only in the House of Representatives, but even as a member of the House Intelligence Committee, incredibly, it seems untenable, and yet she has to do it. Because if Swalwell is thrown over the side, what is to be said about Joe Biden, whose compromise by the Chinese Communist Party is arguably vastly larger? And of course, the responsibilities we'd have if he were to become president of the United States and be so compromised is a far more serious problem for the country than the Swalwell matter. Do you think that may be operating here in her determination to protect this very, very indefensible individual and his conduct?
Well, it's a little hard to know. Remember, she comes from San Francisco, and Senator Feinstein, who was chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, apparently had a Chinese communist spy as her driver in San Francisco for 20 years.
He actually was her office manager. This is an even more stunning fact.
That's
He
right.
drove her, but he also ran her office.
And he represented her at various meetings.
Right.
And in fact, he and Swalwell both participated in one meeting in 2013 where they spoke at a public event. Which was organized, by the way, by the woman who was the Chinese spy. I mean,
Fong
all
Fong.
this stuff seems to be like a novel. Partly you don't know to what extent Pelosi simply represents the San Francisco indifference to Chinese espionage. To some extent, you don't know to what extent she's now trapped, because with Kevin McCarthy's campaign this last year, which was very well done and focused on his idea of a commitment to America, she's lost so many seats that she can't afford to have very many people mad at her and still be speaker. So she may be afraid that if she kicks Swalwell off the committee, that he will then vote against her being speaker. And it won't take it takes about 5 or 6 and she's out. Right. So I mean, this is a real problem for her. I think in addition, the left historically has had a huge blind spot. I mean, remember, we've been propagandized for some 70 years that there were no Soviet spies in the United States, even though the best estimate is at least 500. So the left has this deep investment in never admitting that communists aren't nice. And that may be a part of what we're living through. There is a speech, which I know you as an expert on the topic must be very familiar with, by a Chinese professor recently, I think in Shanghai, where he just literally walks through it. It got televised.
Yeah, Deng Xiaoping.
It's kind of wild because he walks through. He says, "Look, we had everything worked perfectly. We had Wall Street. Everything was getting solved. We had many friends, and then along comes Trump. But now we're going to go back to having friends in high places." And he basically says, you buy them, they stay bought. It's all terrific. It's the most amazingly blatant statement about how they think about all this that I've seen.
Right.
And
it was kind of a Rosetta Stone, I think, on what their MO has been in this country, especially their influence operations and deep penetration and the use of Wall Street. And I know you have been, Mr. Speaker, a very vocal admirer and supporter of the work of our mutual friend Roger Robinson in highlighting the degree to which, long before Deng Xiaoping tipped his mitt on this, that Wall Street has been a huge enabler of the Chinese Communist Party and the threat that it represents to us. How important is it, in your estimation, that we continue what Donald Trump has been doing, particularly of late, to try to restrict the underwriting of our enemy by, well, hundreds of millions of Americans, perhaps, through Wall Street's complicity.
Now, look, I think all of this is a matter of life and death for the country. This is the Soviets, in retrospect, had a relatively hollow empire, which was still an enormous threat. I mean, people should not underestimate how dangerous the Cold War was, and that we could have lost it. But we were basically from 1950 on engaged in a grand siege, which we believed that the eventual evolution of a free society would simply outstrip a slave state, and turned out to be true. So the Soviet Union took almost a half century, but they did collapse. The Chinese are a totally different threat. They're economically very competitive. They're technologically very advanced. They have a very deep history and a deep sense of cultural identity. And the truth is, if we don't take them seriously and we don't do the things that are necessary, they will end up dominating the planet. And I think nobody should kid themselves. These are serious people. Xi Jinping is a very serious man. He is the most centrally powerful person since Mao Zedong. And I think that he has been very clever over the last 12 years at acquiring power in a way that most of us would have thought wasn't possible when he first entered into that job. So I think we're in a long, complicated struggle. I think that the forces on Wall Street who've gotten to be billionaires out of China are going to be opposed to us. The forces in Hollywood who've made billions in China are going to be opposed to us. Many of the forces in Silicon Valley who've made billions are going to be opposed to us. And in every case, they value money more than they value the United States of America.
Just two quick data points, sir. One, Joe Biden personally was involved in negotiating the memorandum of understanding that enabled the Chinese to have access to one of those sectors, the capital markets of the United States, on preferential terms. And secondly, we're told now that his NASA team is determined to see what can be done to forge a collaborative arrangement in terms of space with the Chinese Communist Party's counterpart organizations, including the People's Liberation Army, let's be clear. You've studied China carefully, and I know have been very concerned about it for quite some time. You've addressed it brilliantly in Trump versus China. Could you just talk about the degree to which these kinds of proclivities on the part of Biden and the people he's talking about bringing to office if he becomes president will essentially assure, the maybe managed, maybe not managed decline of the United States and the domination of the Chinese Communist Party?
I think the Congress will have to step in pretty aggressively, because this would be like this is not like the Apollo program and our collaboration with the Russians and the International Space Station. We are just beginning to develop real capabilities in space that will ultimately allow us to have dominant military capability in the world. If we decide to start sharing these, this would be as though in 1949 we had decided to share the Strategic Air Command with the Russians. I mean, it's that level of stunning vulnerability. And the problem you have, and it's something I addressed in the Trump versus China, because I was part of the same thing. So at one level, I kind of know how they got there. A lot of us misunderstood what Deng Xiaoping was saying when he went on the Southern tour in 1992. And he said, look, we have to move towards a real market, and we can't just be trapped by communist ideology. And I don't care if it's a black cat or a white cat. I care that it catches mice. We all thought this was step one of opening up China. Well, it wasn't. The value, and I didn't realize until I got really spent time writing Trump versus China with Claire Christensen, who, by the way, did a great job. Has a great future. But we, when you went back and you started studying Deng's early life, you realize that he's a founding member of the Chinese Communist Party. He actually spends a year at Lenin University in the 1920s. He is a pure Leninist. He believes in power from the top down. He never deviates in that. When Tiananmen Square occurs, he's one of the hardliners saying, kill them. You cannot flinch. And so those of us who thought China was going to open up, and I think Biden is probably, and the people around him are probably in that group, we all had this image we projected
Yes.
of a China which was going to become more Western. And I reached the conclusion about 10 years ago that it wasn't happening. I mean, it's just the core problem with that theory was it was wrong. And so I think that it'll be very interesting to see. I think the tension, a series of appointments, including the ambassador. Some talk they may appoint one of the Hollywood billionaires to be ambassador, which would be a total disaster because these are people who've sold out freedom to make money in China every single time.
Right.
Be like appointing somebody from the National Basketball Association right after they finish kowtowing to Xi Jinping. I think to the degree that they become like Baldwin was towards Nazi Germany, that the Biden administration will find bipartisan opposition. Because I think there are a lot of Democrats who also have begun to realize that China is a real threat. This is a sort of thing that's way beyond politics.
Yeah.
This is about history.
From your lips to God's ears, Mr. Speaker, we have to transform this democratic engagement strategy, principally, though, there have been some Republicans who embraced it, certainly in the past, but you're absolutely right. There's no place for it in our future, or we will not have much of a future. Thank you for what you're doing at Gingrich 360, as well as through your conversations with folks like us. I hope that you will return to us in the new year with updates on your thinking. It's great work that needs to be done, and you do it massively well. Thank you for your time.
Take care.
God bless you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks to the rest of you. We'll look forward to talking with you again tomorrow. Same time, same station. Until then, this is Frank Gaffney. Thanks for listening.